Behold, the bridegroom cometh. Go ye out to meet him. Now is the time to trim your lamps and get ready for the coming of the Lord. Stay tuned for the Midnight Cry broadcast.
And I did think of a truth that we've heard a number of times, but it's one that I think needs to be freshened up in many of our lives, all of our lives really. And I guess the takeoff point is from Matthew chapter 5, a real familiar scripture. And this is where Jesus sees the multitude, sees the crowds on the mountainside, sits down, and he begins to teach them. And he gives them first of all, what people have called the Beatitudes. Beatitude is a fancy word, it just means blessings. These are the things that cause you to be among those who are blessed. The word blessed means someone who's fortunate, someone whose circumstances are as they should be. And so he says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That's a strange one to natural ear. But the one that I want to focus on is the one that we've heard many times. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. And to the carnal mind, we imagine that, hey, if I'm good enough, one day I will get to see this figure, this amazing figure sitting on a big chair somewhere. That's not what it's talking about at all. In fact, we see God, who is a spirit who inhabits eternity, is referred to as the invisible God. No one's ever seen, no one can see him. So seeing him in that sense is something that is impossible. We may see expressions of him, we encounter him in a lot of ways, but seeing this figure sitting there somewhere, it doesn't happen. In fact, someone will say, well, what about those things in the times in the Old Testament where they saw someone? The one they saw was the one who came to earth as Jesus, because it is through him that he has become visible to us. He's become focused in his Son, and he is the perfect and complete expression of the Father, isn't he? Scriptures tell us that specifically. But this idea of seeing him has a lot more to do with something that's going to it doesn't have to do with something that's going to happen someday. It has to do with right now. It has to do with the fact that we have to live our lives in this world. And we know what Jesus said, this world, you're going to have trouble. Be of good cheer, overcome the world, but in this world we're going to have trouble. And if we're going to enjoy, I'll come back to the subject of peace, if we're going to enjoy the peace of God, one of the things we're going to have to reckon with is really seeing him. And that means seeing him in the circumstances of life, realizing that our lives, if we have given them to him, they are in his hands. Again, he is the potter, we are the clay. He's the one who charts the course. He is the one who is working out his will, and he is in control. And the only way we're going to enjoy him is to be able to see him. And to see him, we're going to have to see past a lot of other things to which we readily react. And thinking about this, I thought about the obvious example of Joseph. I mean, it's a story we've heard many times. But one thing I want to point out is that Joseph's story is our story. Because God, when he revealed himself to Abraham, he began something. There was a faith that was imparted to Abraham, and he expressed that faith continually, faithfully, looking to God, trusting God with all the circumstances of his life. And if you will follow the train of faith through, you will see that God was beginning something that we are still experiencing today. We are who believe in God, that we who have been born of his Spirit, who have his faith resident in us, we are children of Abraham. That is the race that was descended from Abraham that matters. It has nothing to do with whether you're Jewish or Gentile. It's the children of Abraham's faith. And I'll tell you, if we have faith today, we are in that train. Well, Abraham had a son, Isaac. He had a son, Jacob. And Jacob had a son named Joseph. And that was the center of the story. And it's very obvious from early in Joseph's life that he was an unusual young man. Somehow God made himself known. We know about his dreams and how happy his family was made by his dreams. He had a couple of dreams where it was very obvious what the interpretation was, that one day he was going to stand up and his entire family was going to bow down to him. And boy, they loved that because he was the baby. And not only that, the brothers that he had to contend with were not even whole brothers. They were half brothers. And they were older and they were smart Alecks, and you know, God had a lot of work he needed to do in them. And so it's really amazing and interesting. If we could stand back and see from the point of history, we see the hand of God moving the pieces almost like a chessboard. And we see the amazing purposes of God. We see his heart worked out. But Joseph was in the middle of it. And he was buried in a lot of circumstances that he would not have chosen. He could not imagine that the pathway that led him to what the vision that God had given him was going to take the course that it did. And do you remember how the fact that he was his father's favorite gave him this special coat? And he had those dreams. Boy, his brothers just really hated him. And obviously, as I say, they were in a spiritual condition where they needed a lot of help. And so God had that in mind. I mean, you follow the story through, you will see that God just didn't have Joseph in mind. He had them in mind. He was doing a work in them. But to set all that up, he put it into their hearts to, first of all, they were going to kill him. And I said, we're going to throw him in, we're going to kill him, we're going to put his body in this deep pit, and we're just going to we're going to pretend that, you know, something terrible happened to him, but then we're going to see what happens to his dreams. But you know, God had his hand on that situation. In the middle of that seemingly impossible situation, he put it in the heart of Reuben, the oldest brother, let's not kill him. And Reuben was no prize. If you follow his life, you'll discover that he was no spiritual prize. But somehow God was able to put it in his heart to do what God wanted him to do. Do you know that the heart of the king is in the Lord's hands? Do you know if God allows things to happen, it's because it's not things that are out of his hands. God is not a bystander watching the world go by and just sticking his nose in here and there, trying to fix this and trying to fix that. God is orchestrating in spite of what he allows wicked men and devils to do. God is the orchestrator and the planner of something that is eternal. And boy, he allows us to participate in that. And oh, what a blessing it is to be able to see him and not to just, you know, react like we do. So anyway, he's sent out to find his brothers and to bring back word, take supplies to them. They're off keeping sheep in another part of the country. And so they see him coming. They hatch this plot. And Reuben intervenes and said, no, just put him in a pit. And what was in Reuben's mind was, I'll come back later, I'll get him out, I'll send him back to his father, safe. I don't want his blood on my hands. And so in the meantime, his brothers see a bunch of slave traders coming through, and they decide, hey, why should we get nothing out of this? You see, isn't it amazing when you can see something so evil, and yet you see the hand of God, in spite of that, bringing something good out of it? And so they pull him out of the pit. They sell him for 20 pieces of silver. He's taken down to Egypt, and he is sold to the captain of Pharaoh's guard, a man named Potiphar. And so Potiphar, begins to just put him to work. And here's the thing. How would you and I have reacted to the situation? Now just think about that. How would you and I have reacted? Your own family has just sold you into slavery. Not only that, you know that what they've had to come up with a story to tell Dad, and you know how Dad feels about you. And his dad thought he was dead. I mean, your mind would be going round and round and round and round with the injustice, with all the terrible circumstances. How could God have anything to do with this? The devil's in this. I've got to get out of this and get revenge, something. Oh, God, get them. Oh, that would just possess us. But somehow it didn't. Somehow in the midst of that, there was something about Joseph's character that caused him to see God to the point where he could continue to be faithful, continue to do right, and God's blessing fell upon him. And instead of being a place of horrible trouble, it became a place of divine presence and blessing. Imagine that. I'll guarantee Joseph had more blessing and peace in his life than any of his brothers. They went from trouble to trouble. They had all kinds of trouble in their lives. And you can read about some of it. Some of it's pretty ugly. But here's Joseph, God's favorite, and he is a slave in a foreign country, surrounded by heathen people who believe in all kinds of gods, and yet he determines, I'm going to do right, I'm going to trust God, I'm going to keep my integrity. I don't care about my circumstances, God is in charge, my life is in his hands. And so the blessing of God that rested upon everything that Joseph did was so evident to Potiphar that he kept giving him more and more responsibility, and the more he gave him, the more his whole household was blessed. There was a presence of God, there was a peace. You think about, from heaven's point of view, here's God establishing an outpost of divine blessing in Egypt. Now we would see the injustice of it. God saw an opportunity to express his heart to people that would never have known anything about him. And there he is. And so in the process of time, we see how God blessed him to the point where Potiphar put everything in his hands, said, Joseph, you're in charge. You got the rule. All I'm going to worry about is what I'm eating. You have charge of everything else. You just take care of all my business. I'm just going to come home and eat and enjoy my life. You're in charge. And of course, then the devil hatched a plot, as he often does. And so his wife starts looking at Joseph, because he was one handsome hunk. I mean, that's modern language, but that's what the scripture said. He was well built, good looking. He was just everything a lustful young woman would want. And so she began to press him in the wrong way, and he resisted until one day the circumstances were such they were alone in the house, and he ran out, she cried rape, and she was believed, and he wound up in prison. So here's a man who is determined to serve God, determined to keep his integrity. I mean, who would have known of his family if he'd said, okay, God owes me something here. He did all this to me. I'm going to get something out of this. No, he kept his integrity. God help us. God help us to have that kind of a heart. But here's the poster child for someone who learned how to see God. And I'll guarantee you, he was as human as we are. I'll guarantee you all the negative thoughts that you and I would think went through his mind at one point or another, but they did not come to control him. He had a heart that said, God, I'm going to serve you. And his reward was to be falsely accused and thrown into prison. And we're told in the Psalms that he was hurt with fetters. I'm sure that somebody was accused of what he was accused of. It was not a pleasant place to be. They didn't put him in there with a TV, or the equivalent of whatever they had in the day. It wasn't a country club with bars. This was a prison. This was a bad place to be. So once again, we see a man having an opportunity to make some choices. What am I going to do with this? Here I was serving God, and God was seeming to bless me, and now look what it's got me. Religion in our day is full of a blessings gospel. But what they mean by blessing is earthly happiness. It's earthly blessings. It's what men value. It's the same things that men of the world value, except now we put a religious veneer over it. It is a false gospel. God can bless his people if that suits his purpose. He did it with Abraham. But his purpose in this instance was served by allowing his servant to be in prison. He didn't have any idea at this point, I'm sure, what was going on. But somehow that faith that God was God, that God was orchestrating events, somehow he kept his integrity. I wonder if there's any one of us that would have reacted the same way. Think about it. Man, we need grace. Here we are. We've got a whole history of Scripture to look at, and yet how we react to every little thing. As though, God, where are you? Why did you do this? I don't deserve this. Something's wrong, or I'm getting what I deserve. I mean, it could be 1,001 reasons. Instead of seeing the loving, merciful hand of God doing something that is necessary for his purpose in our lives. I'll tell you, there's a blessing, there's a rest that comes from just recognizing the hand of God and saying, God, you're still God, and I want to worship you, and I'm going to trust you. Just what Job, I believe, said, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. I'll tell you, that's what, and I'll tell you, there's a God who looked down on that jail, that prison, that hellhole of a place to be. And Joseph began to just continue to be faithful to his God. And the jailer recognized it. So now here's God sending somebody to a heathen place, into a prison, to give a testimony of who God is to a heathen jailer. And that jailer so recognized the hand of God upon Joseph that he began to give him more responsibility. Next thing you know, the jailer had put the jail under his charge. You watch over the prisoners, you take care of stuff in there. I recognize that the hand of God is upon you. And instead of that being a hellhole where he was just seething on the inside over all that had happened, there he was being faithful to God, and God turned that awful prison into an enclave of divine blessing. Everybody who went in there found out about God. Everyone who was in there experienced the peace and the blessing of God's presence in that awful place. You think about all the places on the planet, that would have been the place to be almost. You think about it. You think about what God can do with when his people will look to him and trust him. When they see his hand, even in things that are unexplainable and difficult that we don't understand. Joseph didn't understand it. And you know the one time when he tried so hard to get out of it. Well, I don't know how hard he tried, but he said, you know, help me out here. That one, the butler and the baker, and he interpreted their dreams, and the butler's dream was that he was going to be restored to his place in 3 days, and he was. And so Joseph said, remember me. Well, we all do that. So anyway, but you know, it wasn't God's time, was it? And I don't know what went on in Joseph's mind. I suppose he was, I'm waiting now, what's going on here? Surely he's told him by now. I'm sure all those thoughts went through his mind, but you know, it didn't change who he was. He continued to be God's man. God's blessing continued in that place. And I'll tell you, God was doing something in him. There is something that happens when you and I take a steadfast position of faith in God and in his goodness, in his purposes. When we take that stand and we're persistent in it, it changes us. And God was changing Joseph, this young man who had so much potential, but God was changing him into a man that he could use to essentially run the greatest empire of his day, to bring blessing to a heathen nation, to bring a testimony of who God was. God was going to give him something great, but I'll tell you, he wasn't ready. Neither are we, folks. It's not about who we are in the flesh. It's not about natural ability. It's not about zeal. It's not about any of the things upon which we so readily rely as human beings. It's about God so putting those things to death, so bringing forth his life in us, that it will be him and not us. I cannot shake the sense that I feel that that things are going to change, things are going to happen in our society. But I sense his heart. God's trying to get his people ready to wake them up. He's trying to get us ready to be his hand extended to this world. If we are so wrapped up in our circumstances and all the things that drive us and keep us in prison that we can't do that, then what good are we? I tell you, these things are going to become real. These principles, these truths are going to become real. We're going to have to see God in all kinds of circumstances and say, God, I know you're in charge. This is not the way I would choose. But I know you love me, and I know you're doing something that is not just about here. It's about here. It's about my living for you while I'm here, but it's also about eternity. All of that is in God's heart and God's mind. Oh, what are we living for? God help us.
This has been the Midnight Cry broadcast. If you would like a DVD or a CD of today's message in its entirety, please request it by program number. DVDs are $10 and CDs are $5. And for those who request it, we will send you our quarterly publication, The Midnight Cry Messenger, free and postage paid. Send your request to Midnight Cry Ministries, Post Office Box 685, Southern Pines, North Carolina, 28388. We invite you to join us again next week at this same time, and may God richly bless you until then.